Welcome back, everyone. So, what happens whenever all the games are going to disappear? Because that's actually becoming a real-ass concern in our industry right now. Maybe not so much if it's something in your Steam library, but there are so many classics, so many golden games, and even games in actually tremendously large franchises that just cannot be bought anymore. It's a pretty damn absurd situation to be going on, and in a few of these cases it does certainly feel like some of it has got to do with let's just say a little smidge of blatant profiteering. But with that being said, if you would like to perhaps help us with some of our own profit, you could consider checking out The Pale Beyond. The game that we developed on Steam is actually a really good game, and there's no blatant profiteering about it. People really enjoyed it, and we're very excited about it. So you can check out The Pale Beyond on Steam if you want a narrative survival role-playing game. And now to transition out of this very scuffed self-promo and talk about the story, man.
Yeah, because if you buy enough copies of The Pale Beyond, we'll be able to save games just like Gerard the Completionist has.
Bingo!
Theoretically. There you go, saved. I sorted a way out. So yeah, I mean, this is fundamentally, this is what like began the story. This is what began people thinking about it. And it was that on March 27th, which is in 5 days from this recording, the Wii U and 3DS digital stores will shut forever. Which obviously that was announced ahead of, like, well in advance, so people weren't blindsided. Yep. People had time to prep for this, which we'll talk about. People definitely did. But it is just like, yeah, sorry, loads of games are going away. And it took Gerard, the Completionist, the full year, according to the video, to spend $22,000 and some change on basically an attempt to make sure all the games are preserved and playable.
And by the numbers, so he purchased 866 Wii U games, a nice 1.2 terabytes, and 1,547 3DS titles, which is at 267 gigabytes of data, using 460 eShop cards for a total of $22,791. And let's just say, thankfully, this should count as a tax-deductible business expense, because, good God, that certainly does stink.
It's interesting because I think being the Completionist and the history attached, I think it's a good like kind of marketing and branding effort, but it's also something that fits the brand and fits exactly. This is exactly what we need to see realistically, because you know all of it is going to be thrown on storage and then donated to the Video Game History Foundation, which is. The fact that there's a Video Game History Foundation, A+, fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things like, in a way, people could be like, oh, this is just, you know, some self-promo or whatever. There is basically, within the gaming niche, there's no video that he could make that would make that money back.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, he would have to have a sponsor slot every 30 seconds and people watching 100% of the video. Mm-hmm. So it's actually pretty cool. And yeah, those are all being sent off there. And to set a little bit of tone, this is a pretty crazy one. So, ahead of Tears of the Kingdom releasing, whole just Zelda games will stop being available. Just stop, because from March 27th, Wind Waker just won't be commercially available. And the thing here is, like, yeah, you can emulate it and stuff, but ultimately, it's what Gabe says, you know, piracy is a service problem. Take for a game that I really like, Freelancer. Because nobody gives a shit about Freelancer, it's just available. I think the site is abandonware.net.
Yep.
Where it just, like, it's literally just click the button, download the game, maybe, like, install a patch or a CD crack and play it or something. You know, I obviously do own, like, 2 or 3 copies of Freelancer. But it's not always one of those situations where, like, for a lot of people, it is a bit harder to, you know, to do this than just, say, grabbing a copy of Freelancer.
Yeah, well...
and there's so many legendary games, too. Mm-hmm. I remember, like, I didn't use my DS and 3DS as much. But I remember, I think it was you telling me about, like, just the massive amount of extremely good JRPGs and so many games that exist on those consoles.
So this is maybe something we'll have to talk about a different kind of time, but the DS and the 3DS, obviously, time-wise, you think of that was, the 3DS specifically was moving to the HD era of game creation. So a lot of, because that was just expensive, a lot of extremely talented developers had to just go, well, we don't have the budget to make a game for the PS3 or the Xbox 360. We'll make 3DS games instead. We'll make DS games. And that was like where so much talent went. and then no thing after that came there. So I think like, to me, the DS was effectively one of like the, obviously like first console I played on was a SNES, so I'm old enough, I've played lots of video games, but the one that was like the most formative was probably the PS2 and the DS. The DS specifically, because there were so many games that are now lost to time effectively. Not literally, because piracy exists and that's been like the biggest boon to preservation, I think, going forward. But it's like you're talking about the abandonware. All of that stuff is gone, and you have to resort to what very much feels like a legal means. Is a legal means effectively to get it. With abandonware, it's a little bit more, oh, no one owns this, so whatever. But the problem is with specifically like the Wind Waker example here, sure, Wind Waker's not commercially available. If that were a game made by literally who in the 90s, that would be on abandonware somewhere. Because you could just go, yeah, whatever, no one cares. But the problem is, Nintendo could always go, hang on, we're actually selling that. But it's like, when are they going to sell it? Where are they going to sell it? How much are they going to sell it for?
And that's
actually one of the problems here.
That's the perfect transition to talking about Pokemon. So this is a great tweet from Phil Salvador, just breaking down the commercial game availability for Pokemon. 25% available now, 1% available soon, 33% removed soon, and 41% unavailable. Cool. Suffice to say, those sort of orangey yellow and red parts of this pie are quite soon going to merge into one segment of the pie chart, which will basically mean that just shy of 75% of Pokemon will be in the abyss. Now, the thing there is, like, is this because at some point they are going to want to do Turbo 3D Ruby and Turbo 3D Sapphire and, give the Scarlet and Violet treatment to, like, the older regions? So that, because, they often would have big new Pokemon game one year, big remake the next year. And you start to think, like, why are they making it so hard for people to actually acquire a copy of some of, like, even, so CEX is like a sort of secondhand games and electronics shop in the UK. And there are some Pokemon games that are right bloody expensive there. Yeah, because just, even though it's Pokemon, and you would think that so many carts would be made, no, they're actually hard to get, which then means people are, of course, just going to want to pick up a ROM. And then you think like, well, Nintendo and the Pokemon Company can so easily make these be available to everyone. They could probably do it in 2 or 3 months, right? Yeah. It would not be hard. You have to think about why then. And obviously, even if it's not true, even if it is just a bandwidth thing and nobody's got around to it and they don't, they can't think of a good marketing way to properly exploit it, but people are naturally going to think, oh yeah, well, this is just being held back because you want to always drive people to the newest version and you want to be able to like do the remake thing. Yeah, that's what people are naturally going to feel. And I think the even more tragic thing is there's so many of those great 3DS games you talked about that are no longer available. Because they're no longer available and it's harder for them to get, they're inherently more limited to small niches, and that means that it's actually harder for people to hear about them. So it's not only, it's like, look, a bunch of these games being in there's the Seed Vault in Svalbard. I think in Norway, is it? Imagine like beside the seed vault where there's just like, I don't know, a few handfuls of all the seeds that they found. Beside that, you have the gaming vault where apparently, I don't know, society just says, let's preserve the seeds in the video games. But it doesn't really matter if a few copies of some games are in a vault somewhere, because if people don't actually know about them, don't actually play them, and the culture ends up being lost.
Yeah, that's what I think is one of the most frustrating things. And especially when Nintendo themselves are actually doing a pretty good job of making some of that culture available through the Nintendo Switch online stuff. Because they have what's effectively the rebranded virtual consoles up there now, where you can just go and play Nintendo 64, SNES, NES, Game Boy Advance, Game Boy games. If you're on their subscription, you can just go play that. Same with, like, to a certain extent, Sony and their premium version of the PS Plus are like, oh yeah, I see you're monetizing the past, as opposed to, I mean, obviously you don't want to make it freely available. But it's like, it's the selectiveness of which it's done. It's the, okay, well, this is only going to be good for a marketing beat if we do it now. Okay, we'll add this and have it as a wave. And to me, it's like, there's, especially looking at the Pokemon stuff, it's like, it's so bad that no one sat down and went, how can we just make this all happen? It's like video games are this thing where, and obviously you could say the same for movies, but the proliferation of DVDs and Blu-rays and how like cheap and how cheap they are to print, how many of them there are all over the place, and how their price drops off a cliff super fast, you're likely to find a DVD copy of most things that you're interested in if it's not already on streaming. Whereas for video games, because of the added complexity, it's like, no, sorry, maybe it's something to do with like the collection market as well. Old things are going to, especially carts will deteriorate like crazy.
Yep.
Discs will be fine, but there's not going to be that many of them overall, because of how like little printed compared to DVDs. And it's a secondhand DVDs and secondhand games are a completely different experience, and it's an absolute nightmare.
To like help people with some perspective here, you could even just think of a movie like Metropolis. It's the German science fiction movie from the 1920s, which when you actually look at that, it's pretty goddamn stunning. Some of the things that were pulled off there. Good example, like George Lucas, like the design of C-3PO, that's like directly inspired from that movie. But that's a movie that has had like, plenty of restoration attempts and a lot of work having to be done. And that's like the only way that we're able to actually get that.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much 100 years ago now. And eventually there will come a time when we're all 60, 70, 80, and these games are genuinely ancient. And if we don't think about doing things right now, if our time horizon is set to like 5 or 10 years, we're actually going to be in a spot of bother. Even take a show like Babylon 5, where there was a bunch of fuckedy stuff with that, and people are not particularly, let's just say more could be done to like restore it up. Or even so much of that like maybe 80s, 90s media where somehow completely inexplicably it's like, oh, sorry, film got lost. And you're like, what? This is mad. And that thing can actually happen with games. And it's that tricky thing where a lot of this is just black and white mercenary shit, where the cost of maintaining the stores and the libraries is no longer balancing against how much they were used. And mercenary sense, like that does kind of make sense business-wise. But also I think there is something to be said about heritage and legacy and super long-term brand value. Another example of this that is away from the Nintendo sphere is Electronic Arts with legacy dice games like Battlefield 1943, Bad Company, and Bad Company 2 being delisted. Now, a good thing here, like say 1943, that was, I know there was Modern Conflict, Battlefield 2 Modern Conflict on the PS2 and Xbox, but 1943 on Xbox Live and stuff, that was so many people's first introduction to the Battlefield franchise, and it was absolutely loved. People just playing Wake Island forever. So the idea that that's gone. Even take Bad Company and Bad Company 2. Like Cole, who's editing this very video, really enjoyed those games, like with the destructibility and all of that, which is something they kind of stepped away from in the future entries into the franchise. So the idea that it's like, yeah, you can't get them. In fact, people were even worried after some initial reports that Mirror's Edge would be delisted, but apparently that was an error.
Oh yeah, they like that. That was the whole thing on the whole Twitter discourse for most of yesterday was, what do you mean Mirror's Edge is a single player game? What do you mean leaderboards are going away so you're not selling it anymore? What are you smoking? And then they're like, oh, all right, that's all right. We're not removing it. It's still on stores. Yeah. But people were full on like emblematic of, this is a game that like defines so much. It was one of the most interesting games that the West released in that era. What are you doing, taking it away from people?
And it's still amazing today. And the way that like you can play the speedrunning mode with the ghosts. You should take a look at Mirror's Edge speedrunning, by the way. It's a whole little scene into itself. Good friend of mine was very into that. It's just so cool. But maybe someday this will come for Mirror's Edge.
Almost certainly will.
That's kind of worrying.
Yeah, that just means you'll be able to get it, but you can't buy it and enjoy it in the way you probably should be able to. It won't be supported in all the ways that it reasonably should be as a thing that's, hey, this game existed at one point and was good. And I think that's the industry idea of, oh, well, we can't sell this for full price, so it's no longer valuable, is different to people going, oh, it's valuable because it's good and I like to play it. Can I please have access to it? But I suppose that's the whole technology goes forward, and it's like, it's hard to avoid, but it is just, I think, very frustrating to me that old games are like, that's old, whatever, who cares, nah. That wasn't foundational or anything, or all of the ideas, especially from my perspective, because I'm someone who doesn't play games for like, oh, I like this game, I am enjoying it. I really love the cultural like aspect and the legacy of stuff. So I love playing, especially indies that are inspired by stuff. I'm like, oh yeah, I can see where the ideas came from. I see where things were. I can see how this shaped discourse at the time. This shaped how like attitudes were. That's why like I love like especially like console launch games where you play like Resistance, Fall of Man. You're like, oh, this was really interesting.
Such a time capsule.
Really interesting. Yeah, exactly. I love that stuff.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where, what are the financial reasons? Like, well, it's either to do the remaster, sell that later, which Pokemon's done. Even take like Metroid Prime. I mean, that's an amazing piece of work. People love it.
Yeah, that's a reasonably good version of that.
Oh, yeah,
where that is, oh hey, yeah, we've taken the game and it's not the original, but it might as well be. as far as most people are concerned. There's like, you could argue, okay, well, if you want the true legacy of what a GameCube game looked like, that's lost. But there's a little bit of, yeah, that's going to be the preservation version, but the remaster and having that bit of that time capsule of this game's design is intact. This game's like, I guess its sensibilities are intact. You can enjoy it now, and the studio will be able to profit from it because it's the same studio.
Yeah.
Like, that sounds great to me. Sounds fantastic, actually.
So, the whole completionist thing of basically that belongs in a museum, that is good. But I would still say that even if these things exist in a museum, ultimately they're games. And a world where the average punter has got to jump through a bunch of hoops to enjoy video game history is pretty damn sad. It's almost one of those things where I just wish everyone would partner up with GOG and and some big grand scheme could be unveiled. I know that's a bit like, okay, that's not monopolize retro gaming, please, but you know what it's like. Now, the interesting thing though, and I say that because I want to bring up a little bit of I guess what you could call commercial preservation.
Yes.
Which is an interesting thing because ultimately, preservation's done by people. Those people need a wage. And in order to pay those people, if there is a financial incentive to preserve games and perhaps come up with some sort of good service around those games, you could see that as being a bit of a win-win situation. Same way, not exactly the same, but like, the YouTube Partner Program comes in, and suddenly, instead of people making small videos, now that they can make money from their videos, they can afford to hire a team. And because they can hire a team, they can put more time into their craft, and then we all get better videos to enjoy. And now we're at a stage where society, through this economic engine of YouTube, is able to basically just produce custom content to almost your specific preferences to the stage where YouTube is able to just go trounce Netflix. Yeah. At least for a lot of the younger audiences, which is pretty damn powerful. So, the fight to save gaming history, then.
So I wasn't actually aware of this until just going over the document for this. The US Copyright Office has exemptions from the DMCA for libraries and research institutions to make digital copies for archival purposes. And they can even distribute digital copies through researchers through online access systems. You're allowed to go, oh yeah, well, I'm doing some research. Can I have this DVD from like the important time of history? Absolutely, work away. But they're literally don't include video games. Literally completely left out. Which means if you say you're like, okay, well, I'm a part of, say, I mean, obviously you could just buy a secondhand copy of it, but like speaking, if something was lost and you're doing something important for a video game company, you're like, I'm going to go research this. It's like, no, sorry, you're not allowed to access that. Why? Because we're so no.
It's kind of I'd be terribly worried if like maybe an amendment to this was tabled and like the ESA tried to lobby against it.
Oh,
for financial reasons. I really hope they wouldn't, but I wouldn't be surprised if they would.
Yeah, I could imagine.
So returning to Phil, who we touched on earlier, he said, right now, if a researcher wants to study an out-of-release 50-hour-long RPG at a library, they might have to book days or even weeks to, travel, get lodging, research leave, childcare, whatever, because right now, the only way to do it for, say these archives, is to go there in person, because I suppose the copy protections are such that, you wouldn't copy paste an unlicensed EXE.
Oh no, never.
I mean, man, all these fucking copy pasters, these fucking right clickers, it's very dangerous. So this kind of thing is, actually, there we go. As the ESA was one of the several groups in 2021 that successfully argued against adding video games to the exception list for digital archiving and research. Great. So it turns out the thing that I was worried about already happened. Don't you love that?
Yeah, I love the video game industry. It's very, very good. Because apparently the ESA said if you can just have access to old games, you might have fun instead of for research. Oh, and if you want to be able to bypass DRM on single player games that have been abandoned for preservation's sake, no, because that's bad or something. I guess that's their argument is money, please. We like money. But yeah, it's just even archival bodies are just like, now we can't actually do what we can't do, we should be able to do. And you'd think moving from physical would make that a lot easier because it's just, there's the game.
These are digital files.
Sent over the pipes.
They're
copy
not real.
pasted. Yeah, copy pasted. Perfect. Absolutely happy. Everyone's pleased. You know, just set up a pipeline, right? Is that well, this is a terrible idea. But like, you know, if you wanted to go for the utopia deal, it's just, there is a service and you can upload a build of your game to that service. And you do that and it's there forever. And you go, class, thank you very much. And everyone does that whenever they release a game. Like, oh yeah, there's a patch. Yeah, there goes the Steam. There goes the PSN. There goes the archival. Happy days.
Yeah.
Done.
So and that's so easy for a developer to do, by the way. Like, literally shit easy. And it's unfortunate. Like, whenever those Battlefield games are going away, one of the guys, I don't know what his role is at the company, but he worked on Metal Hellsinger. So that's a new game a lot of people love. He just quote tweeted saying like, cool, games I worked on, gone.
Yep.
Nice. And it's like, yeah, that sucks. Now, this is where we get to Embracer, Netmarble, and corporate preservation, right? Some sort of perhaps for profit or whatever preservation. So these are both, I would say, still relatively valiant efforts to do game preservation. They're basically taking the big old resources of Netmarble or, you know, Embracer Group to try to do this. One, where the companies do have a plan to actually make these systems and games available in their museums. So, and what's noted there is not necessarily just as IP farms. So one of the worrying things is you could just have, you know, some shadowy group operating behind the scenes that nobody knows about, just gobbling up rights and then hoarding the rights and, you know, maybe being litigious about them or, you know, bad things that do just happen as a sort of like almost an unpriced externality within the sort of current, you know, system of laws and whatever that we're operating in. But they also plan on using their funds to acquire various projects from private collectors, which means that they can compensate them in a way where the non-profits just can't.
That's good, yeah.
Look, money does grease the wheels in some shit. And it's like, does it suck if you have to pay a private collector to get that rare dinosaur bone into a museum? Yes, it does. Is it better that that dinosaur bone is in a museum than a private collector? Yes, it is.
Yeah, so would it be profoundly unfair to kick that private collector's door in and take the dinosaur bone? Absolutely, 100%. That would be complete bullshit. That would be theft. So there's a little bit of like, yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense. It's like value is kind of real and you do have to contend with that. Everyone can't just be like, I will copy the dinosaur bone. Perfect.
Yeah, so the thing here basically is this going to be preservation? Is this going to be hoarding? Certainly from what Embracer have said, it does feel kind of better. Now, some of that is helped because there are photos of a pretty happy, passionate-looking dude.
Yeah.
And behind him is a humongous wall of video games. He's holding up a copy of Tetris, and that's all good. Obviously, that is something where the ball is in their court. They could suddenly, I mean, he could be the most passionate dude in the universe about all of this, but ultimately his boss could just say, sorry, we're changing things. And what would he be able to do? We all know that can happen in big corporations. But ultimately, I feel like the more groups there are dedicated to preserving games, the better. So if a bunch of, if a bunch want to go and spend some money to do that, that's fine. I would hope that instead of hoarding, though, that they truly are in that for the, the broader goal, and that maybe they would be open to collaborating with other preservation efforts.
Yeah, that's exactly where I think this is like, if I'm to take this to the extremes of how I feel, which is beyond reasonable sometimes, believe it or not, I think that this should be the ESA's like God-given duty, effectively.
Yeah.
It's they should be doing all of this other lobbying and stuff for video games and make sure they're happy and healthy and the industry is growing and etc. But they should also have a massive part of actually making sure preservation and culture and history is preserved, because it's like that's an important part of what makes the future happen, is the past existing and we learning from the past, etc.
Yeah, instead of repeating the mistakes or even perhaps being worse, as with how the ESA lobbied against that archival copy protection stuff.
Yeah, it's really basically dumb profit now as opposed to motivations going, well, what's better for video games in the long term? What's better for the players? What's better for like the entire, not even just the industry, but the concept itself of going forward? And it's like, I guess it's at the point you just cannot trust anything with any company that has even remote profit incentives with a long-term goal like that, because ultimately the line god will say, get that archive in the bin because it's too expensive to
The
keep it that
line
way.
must go up.
Yeah, whereas I think in a much better world, it'd be very nice for Embracer to say, hey, we're making all this money. We're going to put a portion of this money into doing this. Why? Because we think it's important. That's it. No one says if, no one says but. Everyone goes, that's a good idea. Happy enough. Obviously, there's issues with them owning it, but it feels like that should be the way.
It's the sort of thing where, you know, I'd almost think that this is a good opportunity for game streaming. In some of these cases, what I'd say is like, so the problem you're going to run into is licensing. There have been a few dramas we've covered over the last few years in these on this channel where it just turns out that licensing is a complete hellscape and just kills the ability to get some games out to players. Mm-hmm. But it is the idea that you know, you can have your PlayStation Plus subscription and it's just like, hey, here's the PS1 library, go have fun. Because if you think about how little money those games are generating, any of these companies, it's basically negligible. Yeah. So you would really hope that there would be a way that in a significantly more robust fashion and in a fashion that is designed to be cross-generational. Because you don't want the idea of, say, the PS6 comes out and, you know, suddenly we have to build a new way to get legacy games to somebody. You know, you don't want that to happen.
Yeah, that's where I think the emulation stuff should be just kept forward as a standard, and that should be like, why is that not part of all of these companies? Because these are big ass companies.
Let it be something I can pay for.
Yeah, as well. Yeah,
like you can make money.
Yeah.
I'm sure it will be tricky to work some of this stuff out, but I think that's something that so many of us would actually be happy enough to pay for, because, like, look, the value proposition that you'd be getting would be pretty damn cracked. And there are so many amazing games back then that, yeah, they may be lacking a few bits of modern UX sensibilities, but as actual games, they're goddamn incredible.
You go back and play Super Mario 64, man, that game is beautiful. Camera sucks ass, but the game is otherwise absolutely beautiful in so many ways. But I think that's where, obviously there's opportunity costs in companies and stuff like that, so this is really realistically never going to happen, which is why I think I have to like draw this video to close on a pretty on a note that's a little unfortunate, but it's also kind of good, I think, for people. And that is, it's fine. Preservation will almost certainly be fine as far as anything of value is going forward, because piracy exists. That's the one thing that you'll find is, if there's a video game online, there's a damn good chance it's somewhere pirated. And obviously, if you're watching this, you likely know how the mechanics of torrenting works, which is it's file shared. It's not on any one source. There's stuff that goes missing. There's stuff that gets lost, and there's whole sites that goes down. There's trackers that go down, but lots of people have the files, and lots of people are willing to distribute them. I think that's the saving grace, where I'm not overly worried about preservation for video games in the long term. I'm frustrated that the industry doesn't do more and make it more available. But I know if I want a video game, I know where I can go get it.
I think the bit that worries me is, like, yeah, I'm similarly not worried about preservation, but I am worried about access. I'm worried about user-friendly access to the history of games.
Yeah, there's a better way.
So that more people can celebrate the medium, and especially as, you know, you talk about the HD era, and, you know, obviously that's just... It's not really an era anymore. When we say HD era, that's more the transition, right, from the PS2 to the 3, and, you know, similar. But, like, you know, there's so many people for whom gaming is a few live services, right? Yeah. And there is an entire, you know, it's like there's parts of, I almost imagine, you know, like a genealogy tree or, you know, an evolutionary tree. It's like there's whole branches of that the modern industry isn't really providing, and a lot of younger gamers maybe don't even know what they're missing out on.
Exactly.
And if they can't access, you know, if they can't have someone who's maybe a few years ahead of them and has played some of these things say, oh, I love this game, you should really check it out. If there's not a way for them to do that easily, then I feel like that culture, you know, as the memories go away, that culture is lost. And in the same way that somebody's able to say, you should really try watching Metropolis, it's a landmark moment in cinema, or you should try watching some Buster Keaton things, or, you know, some Charlie Chaplin things or whatever. You know, if you can't do that, then there's just something about that culture and that history and that, like, deeper appreciation of the medium that I feel like just, you know, just gets lost. Yeah. And I think especially in a world where, you know, it is all TikToks, short attention spans, everyone trying to grab your attention into some humongous live service or streaming service, or you know how it is, right? There's something that's just like nice and pure and simple about the old way, where it's like, you know what? Disconnect yourself from reality, get Harvest Moon, Friends of Mineral Town, and fuck off for a month. You'll probably go to the woods. Go to the woods with a Game Boy Advance SP, or I don't know, one of those like new little emulator, like the Play.
Oh, the analog is it called?
The analog, that's
Analog,
it.
or the
Just
analog
go
pocket.
to a cabin in the woods, play that for a while, go for a walk. You'll be a new person in a month.
Yeah, I mean, actually,
And the more that it's harder for us to do that. But I guess mentioning the play date, it's pretty cool that exists.
yeah.
Or the analog.
Pocket.
Analog pocket, that's it.
Yeah,
Pretty cool that exists.
there's a lot of FPGA stuff that's very much like trying to get emulation to be less of a thing and more fixed function hardware kind of sorted. Although those are all like niche enough industries.
Yeah,
I'm
and
not
kind of
gonna get-
expensive because of the volume.
Yeah, exactly.
And you
I
have
think
to wait like 8 years for them to arrive.
yeah, from about 20 years from Kickstarter to there, in which case the world's already over, so it doesn't really matter. But I think the one thing I'd literally will go away now, but I did want to just have one thing that crossed my mind.
You're almost free.
Yeah, Splatoon.
Oh, good game.
The first game's on Wii U, which means one of Nintendo's landmark series. The beginning of that series is not available for you to play unless you get a second-hand disc copy.
Oh my god, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, and it's not like, it's irrelevant, because it does have a single-player mode that does have lore in it. You can, and I think, personally, I think it's super interesting because you can extremely see the evolution of design from 1 to 2 to the 2's expansion to 3, and especially knowing that legacy is, as far as I'm aware, the team that followed up from Shigeru Miyamoto, and him like trying to pass on his knowledge to like the Mario devs and then onwards. That's where I was like, hey, you guys get to spin out now, one of the best dev teams in the world, basically. And it's like, oh yeah, the first thing, their company doesn't sell you their first game.
Yeah.
In what world is that just or reasonable or fair to either the devs or the consumers?
And like, just in case you're not aware, because I know it is a little bit in its own corner, and there's kind of like, Nintendo gamers know about it, but maybe, not a Destiny gamer. And I have not played it, but from seeing Matt's reaction, all that I know is that Splatoon, and like loads of my WoW guild, Splatoon 3 and 2, and quite a lot of 1, go so fucking hard, it's unbelievable.
They are some of the better games currently in existence on a user experience level and from a design and interesting perspective. They are fantastic, and I'd highly recommend anyone on the Switch to play 3. It's wonderful.
There you
Wonderful.
go. And with that said, you're finally free. You can leave now. I hope you found this interesting. I know it's not going to impact most of our lives immediately, but I do think it's important, and
It's a
maybe it's
principle.
something that we should just have floating around our heads a bit. So, have a really good day. Of course, plenty of other videos to check out on the channel, and if you would like to play the video game that our team made, you can check out The Pale Beyond on Steam. So, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.